But nevertheless, we share, we say to folks, well, you know, I hate that thing about slavery, and I'm sorry that my ancestors had to go through such a hard time. But when I look around and see where we are today, what was meant for evil most certainly has turned out for our good. And it talks so much about, or it speaks so much about how great America is. And one of my favorite quotes is that of Abraham Lincoln. We know the Civil War really didn't start about slavery. Slavery became a part of the issue, and ultimately we were freed, but it was about states' rights and the power to succeed if you felt like it. And, you know, that Constitution argument, I guess, will be going on until the good Lord gets back. But nevertheless, there was something that Abraham Lincoln said in the book Providential History, and this book was published by the Providence Foundation, one of the publishing companies up east. And Abraham Lincoln was saying that over the booming sound of the cannons and the roars of war and the sound of the guns firing and all that goes with the battle and the wars and the engagement and the struggle, he heard the voice of God over all of that saying, let my people go. And he said that motivated me to speak to the slave issue, that we as a nation couldn't live with this. You know, when you read American history, you know from the infancy of this nation that there were good people from the very beginning that said this institution of slavery has to be done away with. When you look at so many of the founding fathers, some of them who even had big plantations, they hated the institution because their religiosity didn't allow them to be comfortable with the institution. And I believe it's one of the great tragedies of our educational system. They only tell the negative side of the story. You know, very seldom you hear that in the South there was more anti-slavery societies than in the North. You know, you don't hear that. And sometimes there are individuals that use this black experience to divide, when it is a great statement about some good folks. George Washington leaving his will to free his slaves. You know, Ben Franklin was the first president of the Anti-Slavery Society. But you never hear these things. But I say all that to say this: there were some great people that made great sacrifices. One of the biggest owners of a plantation, one of the founding fathers, his name escapes me. It's a great book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Civil War. It names so many of the great individuals, some of them on the North and the South, and it also talked about how they had plantations. But even in having hundreds and hundreds of slaves, they said it's wrong and we've got to change the system. Even some of them who knew that it would bankrupt them, they said that, no, this is not compatible with our faith or with what this nation's about, and we've got to end it. So I stand here an appreciative black man that's so grateful that we live in a country where individuals had a value system that insisted upon letting my people go. And I stand now as an American and enjoying the American way of life. I tell people, listen, my wife and I, we live in a nice tri-level house. We've got 2 cars. You know, we've been blessed to travel the length and breadth of this country. I've been in all 50 states. We've been in Canada and Mexico. We've eaten at the finest of restaurants, and we have enjoyed the bounty of the land. You folks might want to complain, but I'm going to say thank God for America. If I had it all over to do again, let me be an American. Because sometimes, quite often, and regrettably in America, we get caught up with rhetoric and not reality. And sometimes we look right at the fact of a matter, and we're just contradicted. I'm reading a book, and you know, my wife, she's used to me, and my church folk, you know, they say, when pastor gets up, he's going to preach 5 sermons in one standing. But I'm not going to have you here that long tonight. But I love reading, and I have a number of books, and there's a book I read some years ago, because I'm talking about this thing of reality and even some of the tragic things we've seen happen in America, how people have so distorted facts and ignore reality, grab hold of little cliches, and regrettably so many of our learning institutions now, they are antagonists in reference to what this nation is all about. But this book I'm reading, I said all this to say that sometimes facts and realities sometimes just don't seem to meet. And I'm reading this book. It's called 7 Men Who Ruled the World from the Grave. It's a great read. It's by David Breese, and it's a great little book. It talks about the 7 men. It talks about Charles Darwin, Karl Marx, and it talks about John Dewey, and some of you are familiar with these folks. regrettably, because of these men ruling from the grave, we've seen some great decline in America. We've seen some terrible things happen. But I was reading something about Karl Marx, and you know, our president, bless his little heart, we need to really be praying for him. But Karl Marx, they were saying something about communism. And I'm reading this right from one of the pages in this book, page 75. To this day, and I quote, "To this day, any trouble that may be faced within the communist system is not ascribed to the fallacies of Marxism or Leninism. Rather, shortage, suffering, and political instability are blamed on the fact that communist ideology has not been properly taught." You know, I was reading that and I said, boy, that sounds so familiar to a certain guy. And no matter what happens, I just haven't articulated to the American people about my program. You might not know what I'm talking about. You know, it just seems that I haven't explained myself sufficiently. We got shellacked in this last election last week because I haven't explained. I said, wow, that's frightening. And this guy sounds awful lot like Carl here. I mean, the more I read, you know, the more he sounds like Carl. And then there's another statement in this book. I was reading the manifesto and I said, good God, confiscate business. Wow, General Motors, Chrysler, wow. I'm not going to say he's a communist, but he in the manual there, folks. It's frightening. And then I was reading another paragraph out of this book and was saying, as a result, Marx argued that the working class labors in utter hopelessness, drops deeper into discouragement, and finally dies in distress because of capitalist exploration. From this come all the difficulties the world's face, he says. You know, again, this reality and fact. Now, we are a republic here in America, and we have had capitalism, and 90 miles from us, there's a place called Cuba. Now, I haven't heard of people getting in tubs and grabbing doors off their house and making makeshift rafts to try to get from America to Cuba. But I have heard of people using bathtubs and all the other kind of stuff from Cuba trying to get to America. And I'm saying, boy, this confusion still reigns. Individuals, but the fact of the matter is that we live in the greatest nation in the history of the world. God has blessed us above measure, and every day that we wake up, we ought to thank God that we are Americans and that God has blessed us to appreciate the greatest bounty that the world has ever experienced. And like I said, I've traveled a little bit and been in places in 3 different nations in Africa, countries in Africa, you know, even England. I mean,